Good morning, Mr. Nat King Cole brings you on to, what is the name of this program, Mrs. Busby? Oh, yes, Viewpoint. I remember now.
I didn't know there'd be a test. I'd have studied.
Well, we have to have
Thank you.
Not
Thank
only
you, John.
Not only we have a guest, we have a technical engineer, too. Thank God he's here.
Well, we only invite guests that can run the program.
Welcome to Viewpoint, your personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Judge Jonathan Wright has asked to come back again and talk to you so he can sell you on his many wares and accomplishments. And we're happy to have him as a guest. And I don't mean to be flip about that either. We're very happy to have you back, Jonathan.
Well, good morning. It's great to be here.
I'd try to start with a kudo or two. And I understand we have some 8th graders that won a basketball tournament here. I saw a quick headline on that. So congratulations to those youngsters. And also, while we're at that, to the parents who make sure their kids get there on time, and most especially to the coaches who give their time. That can't be a very remunerative job as coaching 8th graders, but it's a demanding job, and so kudos to the coaches who get involved there.
Kudos to everybody who deals with 8th graders, having had several of my own.
Yeah, they put in a lot of work and a lot of effort.
Oh, my God.
We have Coach Wright here. Besides being a former state's attorney and a sitting judge, he's also a coach. Not the Bobby Knight type.
No, I'm not throwing any chairs this season, so that's a good thing.
I think any similarity between you and the aforementioned is non-existent.
Well, Judge Wright asked to come back.
I've known you for several years.
We don't often get contests in these this particular election. We have Judge Wright is running for his seat on the bench again, and he has a worthy opponent, and he's asked to come back, and so he can tell us a little bit about his work on the bench, and we appreciate having an opportunity to bring you on, Judge. The difference between an associate judge, take us from the top, as they say in showbiz, and explain how that breaks out.
Because when John McCullough, rest his soul, was up there, he was called circuit judge.
Correct.
And now you have a whole different title. Does that change your job description at all, or is it just by another name?
It's similar to Judge McCullough, Justice McCullough.
Nobody can be similar to John McCullough.
Well, there's that.
And I say that with respect.
Well said. So the state is divided up into circuits, judicial circuits.
Right.
We are in the 11th Judicial Circuit.
Right.
That's comprised of Logan County, McLean County, Woodford County, Livingston County, and Ford County. Within the circuit, then, there are a certain number of circuit judges that are apportioned based upon population. And then depending on the population within a given county, that will determine how many circuit judges are assigned there. For example, Logan County has 1 circuit judge. So sometimes in this race you'll hear resident circuit judge. That means it's the only circuit judge that's assigned permanently to Logan County, and they have to live in Logan County, so they're called a resident circuit judge. Woodford County, similar type of population, has the same thing, 1 resident circuit judge. Now you get to McLean County, they have several circuit judges because of their population. And then within the circuit, there are also what they call at-large circuit judges who run circuit-wide, all 5 counties to be on the ballot and run circuit-wide. So they're apportioned throughout the circuit, and then based upon population, there are a certain number of associate judges that are assigned throughout the circuit. They're not necessarily permanently assigned to any one county, but they are assigned throughout the circuit. Typically, Logan County has had 1 associate judge just based on volume and population, but they can be reapportioned based on caseload. And in fact, coming up here probably this year, there will be a reassessment to see what the numbers look like in terms of caseload for Logan County, Livingston County, Woodford County, to see if there's going to be any reapportionment with associate judges.
Now, as a resident judge, and a judge in fact, can you be transferred to another county if the need, say, was greater in McLean than here? could you be transferred up there, or what?
Theoretically, anything could happen, but that would be a last resort because the resident circuit judge is that dedicated circuit judge for that particular county. Most likely what would happen if there was a need, an associate would be reassigned. So for those of you who remember pre-1970 Illinois Constitution, they used to be known as the magistrates, and then they changed titles and became associate judges, and then they've been associate judges ever since.
Judge Thornton would have been a magistrate, would he not?
He was an associate. I don't know if he was on the bench before 1970 or not.
No, he what we called a magistrate in those days before he. I want to tell you, Judith and listeners, both of you out there, pay attention now. But knowing a judge is a big deal, and that'll get you a lot. And I'll tell you why. I have personal experience with that. Years ago, I was going to Chicago on business and decided to stop at what was known as the Old Log Cabin Inn for a cup of coffee. Well, I came to pay, and I didn't have a dime. So I called the waitress over.
Deadbeat.
Told her my circuit. I said, would you call it? I'd like to write a counter check. Would you bring the management over, please? So he comes over and he says, you know I buy up here in Livingston? I says, yeah, I know your Ford dealer up here. You know Bill? I said, yeah, I know him well. Who else you know? I said, you know Judge Hubert Edwards? Yeah, you know Hugh Edwards? And I said, yes, I'm acquainted with him. And feel free to call him. No, if you know him, go ahead and write the check. I don't care. So knowing people in high places will get you $5.
Well, you're the only, you and Jim are the only
Which
people
is what I
know
wrote
in
the
high
check
places.
For. The demand, Judge Wright, demand on your time. When you hand down a decree or whatever it might be called, then that's subject to renewal, and that can go to the appeals court if somebody doesn't agree with the judge's decision.
Correct.
And theoretically it can go all the way to the state Supreme Court. Well, of course it can go to the federal court if it gets to be a big deal, but we have an appeals court here. And we have two local gentlemen sitting on that appellate bench, Justice Tom Harris and Justice John Turner, local boys on the appellate bench, which I think is a big deal.
Very much so. Excellent jurists. And really, that's part of what created this opportunity for me to be resident circuit judge, because Justice Harris was the prior resident circuit judge for Logan County. And then he ran for the appellate court, and he won that election, which created a vacancy in the resident circuit judge position. So when that came open, Justice Garman, Rita Garman, she declared
nice
a vacancy and put together a search committee and took applications. I put in, Judge Workman put in, I think there was 4 others that put in for it, vetted everyone, and then I was honored and humbled enough that the Supreme Court appointed me to fill out the rest of the term of Justice Harris's.
And that's why you're in the trenches today now, working for votes.
Correct.
Now, do they have some time frame whereby you're appointed by this commission as opposed to being elected? If you're within so many days, weeks, months of an election, do they let it ride?
That's always up to the Illinois Supreme Court to say, we'll just leave it an open seat and let somebody, whoever wants to run for it. In this situation, Justice Garman and the Supreme Court decided to declare it a vacancy and then do the appointment process, because a resident circuit judge has terms of 6 years. So it's a little bit different than most terms, which are 4 years. It's 6 years. So given this term that Justice Harris had was going to run out in 2020 one way or another. Now, he would have been up for retention as opposed to election, but it was going to run out. So they declared the vacancy, and so my appointment then runs through 2020, which is why I'm running for election now.
Okay. I'd like to ask you a personal question, and
Be careful now.
couching it that way, you can say, no, I don't want to answer it. Okay. Now, I've been in that courthouse many, many times, and it's such a gem. It's broke right now, quite broke. An idea was floated by somebody, I know not whom, to maybe we should just get rid of it. What do you think?
That has presented an issue for the court system. One of the things I've had to do as resident circuit judge is try to manage dockets and caseloads for different judges in a way that keeps continuity. Because as you may know, there was a point in time where the entire third floor was shut down. Well, that created issues not only in terms of losing a courtroom, losing office space, but that's where our jury rooms are located.
Yeah.
So when we have jury trials, then there was no place to house the juries. So one of the things I tried to do as resident circuit judge, although I'm not necessarily in charge of anything directly like that, I facilitated a meeting with all the elected office holders, and everyone's been great. We've had to double up office space in different locations. For example, a court reporter who was on third floor has been sharing office space with Lynette Bruce, who's my administrative assistant, and been doing so for some time now. And it's worked well. Everybody's pitched in. But we actually worked with the county board, and the county board secured the building across the street from the courthouse by rent for a year. It used to be the old Avery Comstock building. Mm-hmm. And we used that as an alternate site. And in June, there was actually 2 jury trials going.
Really?
So we had to manage where we located juries. And so, again, those are part of the administrative duties that a resident circuit judge has, and we've worked through those things, and frankly, it's come off pretty well. But having said that, there are some pressing needs. As a judge, I can't really communicate a vote one way or another. It's on the referendum. That's up to people. I can encourage people to really get educated. The issue with the dome is significant. As I understand it, it's not structural. The dome's not going to fall in structurally, but there's a lot of leaking, and it's the interior insulation that's starting to fall in larger and larger pieces.
Well, I recognize what you said just a few minutes ago, that you can't urge the electorate to vote one way or the other, but Mrs. Busby and I can, or we even if we get fired, we can still do that.
Yeah, right.
This is a very, very serious matter, this courthouse referendum. And as I understood, correct me on this now, I've forgotten the numbers. It's like 50 cents on 100.
I believe it's 50 cents for every $100.
For every $100.
Big
That,
deal.
ladies and gentlemen out there in the airways, that's just peanuts. $5 out of 100, for goodness sakes. This courthouse is a gem. I hate to think of how our court officers, all of them, each and every one of them, would operate without the facilities which we now enjoy. I've said for a long time, and I say it again, and I'm happy to say it. I think we have some outstanding court officers in that courthouse. We have some wonderful. Everybody in each and every office serves us well. Losing their home territory, so to speak, would be a disaster. Yeah.
Well, I can say on a personal level, as a judge, I enjoy walking into a courtroom that has the history and the character to it. And you know, to know that I'm sitting in the bench that Judge McCullough sat in for so many years and really was not only a personal but almost an iconic representative of justice in this county for such a long time. That really means a lot to me on a personal level, and I enjoy that quality and that aspect that this courthouse offers.
And the ambiance at the Avery and Comstock building pales in comparison, right?
Pales.
Right. It's functional. It's worked, and we're glad that the county board
Heck,
made that
I'm
available
functional
for us.
and I'm not in demand.
Well, sometimes.
But having said that, it certainly isn't the same perspective as a courtroom. And, you know, people respond differently when they walk into a room that seems just like 4 walls and a desk, as opposed to walking into a courtroom that commands respect.
It's kind of an
You bet.
awesome thing to walk in that, particularly that third floor courtroom.
Very much so.
That's just kind of like off of a movie set.
Is that decimated completely, or?
It's not so much decimated, but that's the one area on the third floor that still has the original plaster ceiling over the top of the drop ceiling. And so that's really what caused the issue, is that because of the water coming down through the dome and then into the plaster, we had 2 chunks, probably 6 inches across, of plaster fall through the drop ceiling while court was going on. Thankfully, no one was injured.
I'd
but
get your attention in a hurry.
It got everyone's attention, and at
yes.
that point, Sheriff Landers, who's kind of along with the county board in charge of the courthouse, said this is unsafe and we
Am I
can't
correct
use it.
in assuming that the sheriff's kind of in charge of the building physically?
Correct.
Well, it's nice to be
Yeah.
right for a change. I would mark that down. I want to go home and tell my wife about that. I was right.
And he's really
I'll
done
remind
an
you.
effective job of trying to manage it, because as of this week, the 3rd floor is now open back up again, except for the courtroom, because that still has the plaster ceiling issue.
Yeah.
But there's been some construction work done. The county board has worked hard at it, and they've put in the attic area basically a ceiling, so to speak, that spans the width of the diameter, so that if there's anything dropping, it'll fall on that. So some of the immediate fall hazards are removed. So the state attorney's office has moved back up. The sheriff has given the green light for the other offices to move back up. The jury rooms are now open and available. So that will relieve some pressure on a temporary basis, but we're still short 1 courtroom. And then again, it's only a temporary fix in terms of putting that kind of false ceiling there.
Well, that
My
has nothing to do,
goodness.
of course, with election to the judgeship. That is the reason Judge Jonathan Wright is up here this morning. But, I heard one smart mouth say, "I'll just tear the thing down." Well, if anybody's that stupid, I just walk away from it before I get in trouble.
But it does highlight, and you kind of started off with the question of what's the difference between a circuit judge and an associate judge. So I talked about facilitating those meetings, making sure there's ample courtroom space. Those are the administrative duties that a circuit judge has. For example, in this past year, I oversaw the budget for the court system. It obviously goes through the county and is funded by the county, but I manage that. I put together the numbers. Those are some of the administrative duties.
And then they just vote up or down on your
Correct.
presentation.
But, again, this takes a whale of a lot of knowledge, and by the way, a pretty good investment of time, as well as effort to prepare that budget. And there again, it's background knowledge. And that's what we're talking about.
And one of the other things I'm working on that we're actually close to getting accomplished, and I've been working with the sheriff and the county board, is having video conferencing. So we have our courthouse where it is, and then 2.5 blocks away is a safety complex. So obviously anyone who has a charge pending in a criminal case and they're in custody is brought over for court. In order to do that, they're brought over 3 at a time. And there's security measures. They're shackled, and there's a deputy that's pulled off the road. They transport them, bring them for court. When their court is done, take them back, and if there's more that need to come, they transport the next 3. That's what has to be done from a security standpoint. It's very inefficient. It takes a lot more time to handle it that way. By statute, there are certain types of cases that can be held by way of video conferencing. A status hearing, pre-trials, arraignments, things of that nature can be handled by way of video conferencing. So
No.
right now, what that would mean is then the sheriff's office, for those types of cases, would not have to transport that particular individual over to the courthouse. They could remain in the safety complex and appear by way of video. And so we're very close. We have it set up in the courthouse. It's getting set up probably in the next couple weeks in the sheriff's department, and that should streamline the criminal call significantly.
And leave the deputies on the road.
Correct.
Which is an important thing. By the way, speaking of being on the road, you and I are going to be on the road if we don't take a few minutes' time and acknowledge our sponsors. We'll be without a job. We'll be on the road again. Go right ahead, Mr. Ash. Welcome back to the studio here at WLCN. Program is Viewpoint, of course. Our guest this morning, Judge Jonathan Wright, who's running for his seat again That just doesn't come out very well. There's something in me. Let's go to your background, Judge Wright, your schooling and so forth. Now, how it is that we brought you to Logan County to start with?
Certainly. Well, I graduated from Monmouth College. I actually grew up in the suburban area of Chicago. Went to Monmouth College, played basketball there, and got my degree there. And then I went back to Chicago for law school, Chicago-Kent Law School, which is downtown. Graduated from there, and it was an interesting experience for me because although I grew up in the suburban area, when I went to Monmouth, I spent my summers there. And without realizing it, I think I became more acclimated to a smaller community.
Did you?
And so I went back to Chicago. I realized very quickly that that was not really where I wanted to invest my time and resources and raise a family. So I went back to Monmouth, practiced in a small firm there for a couple of years, and then got on with the Attorney General's office, where I was an assistant attorney general for a period of time out of Springfield. And when that came, I didn't know anyone in Springfield, but as things would work out, my sister and brother-in-law were living in Lincoln at the time. My brother-in-law taught 1 year and coached 1 year at Lincoln Community High School, and it was that same year. So they said, we're living in Lincoln. Why don't you just move to Lincoln? They were living in the apartments there at the end of Decatur Street that kind of back up to the high school.
Oh, yeah.
And so they said, there's an apartment open here. Why don't you just move here? So I moved there. Started going to church, met my wife, who's a lifelong resident, Melanie. Her maiden name's Usherwood. She grew up in the Union area, the suburbs of Union, as I like to call it. And
That's
met
what
her.
going to church to do for you. That's your wife.
Right, that's exactly right. And then just put down roots and raised our family here, and opened my own practice, and had that for a number of years, and not only represented individuals, but also the city of Lincoln, the city of Atlanta, some townships, the Lincoln Public Library District for a period of time. And then from there, I had an opportunity open up to fill out the remainder of the term for State Representative Turner, then State Representative John Turner. He was elected to the appellate court, and I filled out the remainder of his term as a state representative. And then after that opportunity closed itself, the census was such that the Democrat leadership drew within the district 3 Republicans in the same district, so I decided not to run against incumbents. I then joined the state's attorney's office in Logan County, and from there I was an assistant, and then ultimately became the elected state's attorney for 2 terms, although I didn't fill my second because that's when I received this appointment.
I think you really nailed it when you said this is such a great place to raise a family. Surely this has got to be better than Chicago.
It's a wonderful community, and it's one that I've really embraced, and I have to say I owe a thank you to the people of this community. Sometimes when you move into a smaller town, people say, well, if you're not a certain last name or you're not from there. I have never had that experience in this county. The people of this community have always embraced me and welcomed me and really given me some wonderful and unique opportunities. So if nothing else today, thank you to Logan County. Thank you to the people of Lincoln. Hartsburg, Emden, where we live in that area, I have the privilege of coaching. They've embraced us with open arms. I just can't tell you what that means to me and to my family to be received that way. And that's what this opportunity then as state's attorney and as judge now really gives me a chance to invest back into a community that's invested in me.
That's what happens, Judy K., when you stand there and look them in the eye and treat them right.
Yeah.
It comes back to you.
That's right.
And that's just the way Jonathan has conducted himself and found his nice wife. And through the courts and so forth, they have a rather large family, 6 children.
6 children,
That'll
3
get your
girls and
attention.
3
Oh, you have.
boys.
I
That'll
didn't
get your attention
realize
in a
that.
hurry.
Yeah, right.
3 of each?
3 of each.
Well, you planned that even.
Well, I'd like to take credit for it, but I don't think I can
was
do
that
that
by
honestly.
It's just a shirky toot, really, isn't it?
3 of each. We had our boys. We went to the store to get them, and we decided we'd like to have a little girl, a little sister for them. And they told me at the adoption age I was too old. That broke my heart. But in truth, they were right. I was well over 40 by then. And I think they were correct in their judgment. But at the time, that kind of hurt me a little bit. So we just have the 2 boys, which we're very happy to have. So we know something about that, going to the store to get your kids.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we have a blast.
Do your boys and girls play basketball, and which do you coach?
I coach basketball, and I coach kind of both of them. So I have a son that's a senior, a sophomore, and a freshman, and I'm the varsity basketball coach, so I do help with the JV as well, too. My freshman and sophomore play on the JV, and then my son's on the varsity, and my girls play volleyball.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
We
That's
didn't
good.
have that in my day. There was no such thing as soccer or volleyball. It was either the rugged sports. It was basketball, football, and track.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That was it. And those were the days, of course, from the GAA Girls Athletic Association. Put their bloomers on while go across the street.
But it's been a great experience. I enjoy the coaching part. I've done it before, even at Hartsburg-Emden, because it's really a chance to invest in young people. And, there's really a change in judicial philosophy. I think for a number of years, the profession had the idea of remaining aloof and distant from the community. And there's certainly boundaries we need to maintain as a judge, and I think we all understand those judicial ethics. But it's kind of coming full circle with being a judge that's still investing in the community and being a presence. And I think that helps people relate in a meaningful way, whether it's helping in a food bank, which I enjoy doing, or coaching. I've been with Lincoln's Birthday. The Illinois Judges Association has books that they will purchase for students and read, and I've been doing that in the schools. And that gives a different face to the judicial system, the court system, as opposed to that's a big bad judge who's just going to do bad things.
Well, this certainly helps elevate the respect for a judge, because you see him as the kid's dad and a real person, not somebody who just folds into a closet on the third floor.
And that's important. I just came from a week-long judicial training that's mandated every couple of years. And there's a growing trend for what they call procedural fairness. And it's kind of common sense, but it's something I think maybe has been lacking. And that is the reality that it is that notion of respect, treating people with respect. So they did a study, they've done several studies of what triggers people's compliance with a court order. In other words, if the court says pay this or do A, B, and C, will they comply? And going into it, most people think, well, that's going to be based on did they get the outcome they wanted. If they wanted outcome A and they got outcome B, they're not going to comply. And the studies really showed that had very little to do with it. What had everything to do with it was things like voice. Did the judge and the court treat the person with respect? Did they give that person, that litigant, an opportunity to be heard in a meaningful way? Was the court transparent? Did the court explain why the court did what it did? Not bracing it in legalese that nobody can understand, and boy, that sounds impressive, but what does that mean? So a judge really explaining why the judge arrived at a certain decision the way it did. And so there's a lot of attributes that go into that really bear out on a person walking away understanding I didn't get the outcome I wanted, but I understand why the judge did what the judge did, and the judge let me have my say in court and treated me with respect.
When you're talking with a litigant, can you bring up, now, if you had done Plan B instead of Plan A, you wouldn't be here?
Certainly. Particularly in a criminal type setting, for a criminal case that is sentencing, those are all important things to weave into it, but again, in the right way. It's not a matter of just stating the obvious and beating their head with the obvious facts that they messed up, but where do they go from here? What do they do from here? The idea of reformative justice, yes, there's an aspect in the criminal courts to punishment, but there's also an aspect to restoration, that there's still life beyond this sentence, and there's still a way to get something out of your life and be a meaningful member of community. And weaving those two together is a real challenge.
I forgot, Judith, you and I are just really bad about this. We forget to tell the listeners, both of you out there, pay attention. Our number, somebody might have a question and or a comment. Be very nice, be very attentive to our judge this morning. He's our guest. 648-5510.
Is there a minimum age?
I wasn't done.
I stepped on you, I'm sorry.
I didn't bring my gavel.
Yeah, really.
I guess I'm done now. Go ahead.
Is there a minimum age at which a person goes to court? I mean, if you sinned,
Well, there's
throw
Oregon
rocks at
wants to see you
somebody.
till you're 12 or something?
obviously a juvenile or a
Juvenile
minor
court.
can't file a civil action on their own, but that can be done by a parent or a guardian. So some instances may be where perhaps a minor is hurt and they might have a private cause of action in some type of tort or negligence. That can be brought, but they can't file it themselves. The parent or the guardian would file it on their behalf. On the criminal side of things, there is juvenile court that's separate from adult court. And there can be pleadings filed against a juvenile, but it's treated much differently for obvious reasons. Those are all sealed. It's not open to the public because there's the hope that particularly at that young age they can still rehabilitate and put those decisions made when they're 14 and 15 behind them so they can be a productive adult.
Which reminds me, there is an expungement process.
There is.
Explain that expungement process, Judge Wright.
So depending on the classification of the offense and the sentence that was imposed, there's a period of time that can expire by which a person can either have their criminal conviction sealed. In other words, it doesn't go away. It's still accessible to law enforcement, but the general public doesn't have access to it. For example, an employer or a potential employer. Or there's some types of cases where they can apply for an expungement where it's taken off the record completely and it's not even accessible and it doesn't exist anymore for law enforcement. And it would be too time consuming to kind of go through which qualifies for which, but there are those opportunities available.
Do the judges here in Logan County hear both juvenile and adult cases?
And part of what a circuit judge does is have input with the chief judge as to which judge gets assigned which cases. Right now, I'm hearing all civil cases because I came out of the state's attorney's office. So for a period of time, most of the pending criminal cases were filed either by me or by the office when I was state's attorney. So that would be a conflict of interest.
Surely.
So I've been handling civil cases until those conflicts resolve themselves.
They don't need you to stand up a second time and say, I was right, see?
648-5510. Judge Wright, do you consider your experience as a state's attorney to have been valuable to you as a jurist?
Very valuable because, again, it gets back to making decisions, because many times as a state's attorney you're making charging decisions, and some of the most important decisions you make never result in a pleading being filed. It's the decision to say there's not enough evidence and I'm not going to charge this person and put them through it when there's not sufficient evidence. So you do get some of that decision-making experience as a state's attorney. You also learn how to interact with people, victims who are going through traumatic experiences. You also learn how to interact with individuals who are charged and who might be adversarial on a personal level with you, and how to diffuse some of those things. Those are important aspects to learn. I'll never forget the best compliment I ever received as a state's attorney. There was an individual who was actually a victim in a case, a significant case, and was injured. And law enforcement had reached out to this individual, and he was not cooperative with law enforcement because, unfortunately, he had made some decisions in his past where he interacted with law enforcement that got him on the wrong side of things. And we were persistent in the case because it was a kind of a significant type of case. And I reached out to him, and long story short, we took the case to trial, and we got a successful verdict. And at the end of the case, he turned to me and he said, "Thank you." And I said, "Well, I appreciate that, but I'm just doing what the state's attorney does." He said, "No, thank you for treating me like a real person."
That's the whole ball game.
And that was probably the biggest compliment I ever received as a state's attorney and a prosecutor. It would have been easy, particularly in a small community, to just kind of treat him a certain way because, quite frankly, I prosecuted him on other cases in years past. But that really resonated with me that I need to make sure I keep that approach with everyone.
And it resonated with that individual, obviously, or he's not going to make the effort to thank you in the manner in which he did in an open court, which was that's a real compliment.
There is a commercial or a PSA on television that asks the question, what is justice? And
I ask that every morning in my house.
It's whatever Mrs. Gossett says. Put that down.
As the gavel falls.
Yeah. And that's a very good question. And a part of that is treating everyone the same. We groups, old people, for instance. Bill and I admit to not being 29 anymore.
I can't remember that.
Oh, I'm sure we had to be there at one point or we wouldn't be where we are. But at any rate, some people who are elderly think that they're picked on. And some people who are young think that they're picked on. But if we could just learn to treat everybody with respect.
Very much so.
But we don't.
I'm going to give her that lecture on the way back as we go through Lawndale.
And that weaves into kind of the evolution of the court system. We have a wonderful local bar association with high-quality attorneys. Having said that, what we see in Logan County, trending in other counties, is a growing number of self-represented litigants for a number of different reasons. And so as a judge, you always have to bear in mind that that's a scary perspective for a self-represented litigant to come in. They don't have any formal training or background, and they certainly have every right to represent themselves. And it's a scary situation. So you have to bear in mind that sometimes a reaction isn't necessarily anger at the court so much as it is nerves, so much as it is anxiety. And so it's a fine line to walk to maintain the dignity of the court and the proper decorum and the rules of evidence, and yet also allow them to have their voice, to have their say, so they can walk away from the process feeling like they were able to communicate to the judge what they wanted to communicate.
Do you ever have a strong feeling when somebody wants to represent themselves, to remind them of that old saw, he who represents himself as a fool for a client?
Well, I do try to encourage people that I have to hold them to the rules of evidence. I have to hold them to the rule of law, and it is a complicated process. And I remind them that there are legal aid opportunities out there if they can't afford to hire a private attorney. And so I do encourage that, but having said that, I also make them fully aware that that's their right if that's what they choose to do. Or if they have no other choice, that the court will give them just as much attention as the other side will get.
Judge Wright, have you had any, of course we have to be very careful about this, but anything that happens in an open court is an open record. Is there anything unusual that's come before your bench that you took home as a laugher for the evening? Nothing
that has really been out of the ordinary, and I hope that's on purpose, because I hope as a judge, if I've got a lot to learn, and it's true of any profession. The minute you think you've arrived, you start failing in that profession. It's always growing, it's always learning, it's always improving. But hopefully that's been on purpose, that by treating people with respect, by giving them an opportunity to speak, by explaining the process, that diffuses maybe some of those situations that would otherwise arise. So I haven't had anything unusual happen, and I like to think of that as a compliment to the court system and the way it's being operated. Because again, I try to explain just the simple things. Everything now is electronic, particularly on the civil side. And so there's a laptop on my bench. I try to explain to everybody that when I turn to look at the computer, I'm looking at court files and pulling things up that I need to for the case. And that's obvious to me, but to someone sitting on the other side, they may think,
watching the morning show.
Yeah, what's he doing? Is he listening to Viewpoint?
Well, he's got to have better than that to do.
So, just those basic things of understanding, and particularly where there's two self-represented litigants. Here's how the process works. You begin with your evidence first. Then the other side follows up. There's a right to ask questions. And so a lot of those things can diffuse, I think, some of those heated issues or moments that sometimes come up in court.
We talked about living here as opposed to Chicago. Surely being a judge here as opposed to Chicago would present some unique situations or opportunities or what have you, because it's apt to happen on any given day that somebody comes in there for having misstepped somehow, and you've known them for years. Does that make you just think, oh, boogers, or just go ahead and be judge?
Unless there's some issue that would create a legal conflict, and sometimes that does arise and you have to recuse yourself from it as a judge. Otherwise, that is kind of the flip side to being a judge. It's a great it's a humbling experience. It's wonderful that I've been given this opportunity, but I also realize that every time I step in court, I'm going to make decisions that people don't agree with. Somebody in the courtroom is going to agree and somebody's not going to agree, and you have to be insulated from that perspective of how are they going to respond. I have to do as a judge the right thing, meaning what's the law and what are the facts and how do I apply those facts to the law, and really not be mindful of those other things that can kind of creep in.
Our guest this morning, Judge Jonathan Wright, running for the I want to say this correctly. You explain
the resident circuit judge for Logan County.
Thank you. If the terminology has escaped me, but that I find a lot escapes me these days. Judge Wright will give you a few minutes, a couple of minutes time to sign up, as you did at the Oasis the other day when they had candidates morning, which was a nice event, and we appreciate the folks putting that together. But Judge Wright and his worthy opponent made nice presentations. So I'll let you sum up, Judge Wright.
Well, my summation is pretty simple and pretty direct, and I'm just asking people for their vote. I don't ever make an assumption. I don't assume that because I'm in the position that I have a right to somebody's vote. It's an important decision. It's a 6-year term, and at the end of 6 years, the judge runs for retention, so there's no contested election. So this is a meaningful election that this person's going to be there for a while, and I really encourage people to look at the candidates. You can find my campaign on Facebook, more background information, but this is an opportunity for me to invest and give back and serve in this community. Every time I put on that robe going into the courtroom, I remind myself of the great honor that's been given me, how humbling it is, and that I'm just about to hear the most important case in Logan County. Whether it's a civil case for $100,000 or a small claims case for $75, it's the most important case in Logan County. So I want to ask people for their vote. I'm honored to serve, and I appreciate this community and how it's embraced me and my family, and this is an opportunity for me to give back.
Judge Jonathan Wright, thank you for being with us this morning. We're going to close up Viewpoint like we always do to try to, very simple, and it's very basic. Be the reason somebody smiled today. Thank you for Viewpoint.
Thank you.